Well, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to some. Thank you for joining FSMA Friday for October 2020. I think we're going to call this the Halloween edition for some of us on the food traceability list, and we'll get to that list in just a second. My name is Aaron Bolshaw. I'm the VP of Marketing for SafetyChain and the moderator for FSMA Fridays. For those that aren't familiar with FSMA Fridays, some of you are joining us for the first time. It's an ongoing monthly industry update for food and beverage facility operators, QA, safety and compliance professionals. You know who you are. We love you. We got your back. And we partner with the Atchison Group to bring you presentations on a whole host of topics. This year's been exceptionally vibrant, and today is no exception. We've got a very, very hot topic. We're actually going to be digging into the FDA's proposed rule for food traceability. And we're, simply put, we're here to help make sense of this a bit more, including some very, very important timelines. So little housekeeping. Everyone is on mute, but we do want to hear from you, of course. So send us your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end. We do expect, though, this is going to go longer than 30 minutes. So we'll stay flexible with our time since the topic is quite expansive. So, and we may not get to every question, but we will try to get to some of the more important ones and then follow up with anybody following the show. And then with that, I just want to introduce today's very esteemed guest. I've got on the line Eric Edmonds. He's the Director of Food Safety at the Atchison Group. He's got a lot of experience here. So he's got an interesting combination of legal, regulatory, and food industry. He's been a previous guest here on FSMA Fridays. And so if you want certifications, Eric's your guy. HACCP, he's actually registered with NEHA as a environmental health specialist and a FSMA preventative controls qualified individual for human food. So that's a lot. But Eric, welcome today to FSMA Friday. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Aaron, nice to be here. And thanks for having me. Looking forward to the presentation.
Yeah, definitely. So Eric, as I look through, and we'll get to this list in a few slides, but as I look through that list of foods on the traceability list, we see the usual suspects here, right? The most risky parts to the food manufacturing and supply chain. And if I've got my notes correct, Eric, TAG has actively helped brands in each and every one of these categories. Is that right?
Yeah, that's really right. We aren't specific to a single commodity or food product. We're kind of general regulatory with different backgrounds and everything. So over the last few years, especially since you've seen some of these products in the news, we've really helped a lot of companies with either developing and working out their supply chain issues, or in some situations even helping respond to recalls, which a lot of this food traceability list is designed around facilitating the kind of quick and ready availability of information to address recalls and public health hazards. So we've done a lot of work with all of these products, really.
Yeah, and I like the way the Atchison Group, and we've partnered with you guys for a long time, and we're very fond of this partnership. But I like, we were talking in preparation for this presentation. You kind of put it into perspective. You said something that stuck out. You said, we make big problems really small, right? So when you get a recall, that's a big problem. If you can make that smaller, you want the Atchison Group on your side, trust me. So with that, listen, we always like to start with just a couple of updates on FSMA in general, just kind of the latest updates, and then we'll get into it. Why don't you take it away, Eric, and tell us what we've got cooking for FSMA.
That sounds great. Thanks, Aaron. So I mean, the real big FSMA update is the entire topic for today, the food traceability list, based on a section of FSMA that we'll get into later. But a couple other updates that are interesting and things to watch. The voluntary pilot program to evaluate third-party food safety standards. As everyone in the industry knows, third-party standards, audits, and things are kind of the go-to for supply chain verification and supply chain control activities. And the FDA FSMA was created trying to create kind of a single standard that people could rely on, but then there's all these third-party food safety systems that are working to align themselves with FSMA. FDA's actually said now that they're going to accept requests from these third-party certifiers, their safety standard owners, and kind of evaluate them for their consistency with FSMA. So these third-party audit programs that get assessed by FDA, and FDA says, well, this lines really well with FSMA, it's going to be a really powerful tool for any company that has that certification, but also those customers that are receiving ingredients or products from them, knowing that FDA has given this third-party safety standard kind of their A-OK. They meet all the FSMA requirements. So this is going to be focusing on the human food rules and the produce rules. So really excited to see what the FDA has coming out of that and what they find in some of these ones that they assess. Applications are basically open right now for FDA to assess that one of those standards. So really excited to see how that works out. And then just with the COVID pandemic, you've seen it happen with the produce rule and the human foods, the animal foods preventive controls rules, the certifications that are required to become qualified individuals under all these rules. They've kind of removed to actually allow remote training opportunities, so you don't have to be physically present. And they recently announced that they're going to allow some remote training for the intentional adulteration vulnerability assessment rule, which is a huge benefit because for those that are familiar, the intentional adulteration vulnerability assessment training has a very limited number of trainers available. So it's much newer. I'm not sure the exact number, but it's very few people who are qualified to train under this vulnerability assessment rule. TAG, we have 2 people on our team that are, but and we're actually looking into providing some of these remote trainings for folks now that it's a possibility, but it's just a real interesting topic and a way to get those trainings that are going to be required to actually conduct the required vulnerability assessments at your facility. And that training really helps you identify ways to reduce costs within the program, instead of just assigning control to every single key activity type. You can do risk assessments, and it's definitely going to be a helpful accessibility factor to have that offered remotely instead of in person.
Yeah, so here's another example, Eric, where we're seeing more and more this, remote operations coming into play more and more. And this is, something that at SafetyChain we help with technology, but this is all a factor coming still from COVID and the ongoing problems and being able to mitigate the risks properly. So this remote training for IA is very interesting. So thanks for that update.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so with that, I think we'll get into the nuts and bolts of today's presentation. There may be a slight delay in me advancing the screen.
So if you click on that screen and then there you go. I think you got it now.
Okay, so today, obviously, we have a short amount of time, and with the new rule, there's lots of data. So we're going to do a general overview, talk about the actual food traceability lists that FDA's released for comment, some of the key terms they're looking at, and along with key terms come new acronyms, CTEs and CDEs, that are kind of the events and the data that needs to be associated with each of those events. And so the FDA has kind of defined the critical tracking events as kind of movement from grower to receiver to shipment. Transformers and creators, they're kind of a newer category that we'll talk about. And we'll talk about the KDEs that are applicable to each of these critical tracking events, or CTEs. Touch shortly on the differentiation that comes up with kill step requirements. Then overall, and this is where we'll talk a little bit about kind of the new era of food safety that FDA is pushing for, that's really going towards more electronic databases for readily accessible information, and why the record maintenance and availability requirements under the new rule are really going to be, you're going to have a huge advantage if you actually have electronic record keeping for this program overall, as well as timelines and enforcement. And that last slide that talks about timelines and enforcement will have some links to some of the exemptions that exist, because we're not going to get into them too much today. Just generally, the overall idea of the food traceability rule is it's going to have requirements for people who aren't typically accustomed to having this level of traceability records. But there will be links to that, and if you have any specific questions, we can try to get to those at the end. If not, I can respond via email or something after the presentation.
Very good.
I am.
I'll take over.
Want to
Here we go. All right.
Okay.
You tell me when you want to advance these slides. I'll get them going for you. All right, Eric. We'll make them go this way.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So yes, the food traceability list. We've included just the general list here. There's kind of a more refined list with some more specific definitions that is included in some reference slides that will be included if you want to download the slides after the presentation for more information. We just didn't want to have everything filled with words during the presentation. So in general, the thing you're looking at on this food traceability list, and just like you said, Aaron, they're kind of the usual suspects, things that you've seen in the news recently that have been, or in the last 20 years even, that have been associated with recalls, foodborne illness outbreaks, anything like that. So you see some of the regulars, herbs. There's been a lot of action that's specifically around cilantro in recent years, the romaine and leafy greens things in recent years, or even spinach back in 2006. As well as all the nut butters, peanut butter, obviously is an example of food safety issues that is readily used for several outbreaks in the late 2000s. But it really just includes all these things that, due to their nature, are likely to kind of support microbiological or chemical hazards, their history of having been associated with that, and even the severity of the illness that's associated with them. So FDA's created this list that automatically, if you're dealing with any of these products, you're going to be subject to the food traceability rule for keeping more rigorous records into the overall traceability to facilitate better trace back and trace forward for areas like farms and early processors or early suppliers and things of that sort. But the overall goal of creating this list, FDA really started requesting information for this list of foods in 2014, and it's done several studies as to kind of like what is missing in the traceability system in the United States. So they found, I mean, number one, historically, there were certain people who are exempt from your typical traceability requirements. So the written rule in the CFR right now is generally known as one up, one down. You need to know who you received product from and who you sent it to. But this list will create kind of additional records that are required for each of those. And those records will be accompanying the foods throughout the supply chain. And so if there is a food safety event, FDA will have ready access to information to do the quickest trace back or trace forward to identify the real issue, identify the area where the contamination may have occurred, and to implement really effective recalls that don't expand a month later, or that aren't kind of blanket public health advisories like they've had to do sometimes in the past when they weren't able to track things to specific areas. So the critical tracking event.
So the critical tracking. So that's That's good. That's the full list there. I want to make sure I'm on the right slide for it. I think we do get to some of the or back and forward a little bit later on. Did you want to get into the key terms so that we can kind of level set for anyone that isn't familiar with these key terms, and then after that we'll get into kind of the general records and the overview?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Perfect.
So critical tracking event, like I said, is those growing, creating, receiving, shipping, or transforming any of these foods on the list. So those are the kind of stages within the supply chain that are critical to maintaining the data clarity that the FDA deems it's important to have the information at each of these events. While the key data elements are the records and information that need to accompany those critical tracking events. So we'll go through the critical tracking events one by one and talk about who may be covered by each one and the data elements or records that they would have to keep. Reference records is regularly referred to in the rule, and that really just goes into saying, you know, a lot of information companies already have, and some may have already developed really great traceability programs around them. But the idea is that there's reference records that already have this information, and so your program is going to need to kind of refer to those, which could be bills of lading, purchase orders, production logs, anything like that. And then these new traceability lot code and traceability product description, it's really just adding in that traceability word at the beginning of those. It's really just the same how all of us are familiar with different lot codes and a description of the product to make sure there's documented information about exactly what product is changing hands along the supply chain during these critical tracking events.
Got it.
Okay, I think mine worked that time.
Yep, there you go.
Okay, so the general records review or overview of the rule is you need to list and describe all the reference records, the bills of lading and all that that I just mentioned, and that you're relying on as part of your traceability program, and talk about how those are linked. So it may be a bill of lading upon receipt, and then you have a production record that transforms it into a different ingredient, etc. But just a description of how all these records are tied together along with the supply chain while the product is in your possession. Description of where the records are located, and then a list of all the food traceability list foods that you ship or deal with, including their kind of product identifier and traceability product description. And then general information, just so if FDA does request records from you, they'll be able to understand your program. So how exactly are you assigning traceability lot codes, whether it's a day's production or a repackaging or something like that. And then any specific coding information that they would need to understand your records are going to be the major kind of general overview records required for the traceability rule. So the first step in many of these, since many of them are kind of agricultural products, is the records that are required for growers. And this one is by far the most simple, the least lengthy of all the lists. So the grower would establish a traceability lot code that is tied directly to the growing area coordinates. So this is going to be kind of the GPS coordinates of the field, or kind of the entry point to the field where the things were harvested or grown and harvested. So that's really what the grower does, is identify the specific area or growing area. And so they can send that information. So in the event of a traceback situation, it could get back to a specific farm or growing area on a farm to really limit the potential for kind of a large recall. We're not going to talk about it too much. I did include a slide in the reference records about additional key data elements for growers of sprouts. It'll be kind of similar to the first receiver records that I get to in a little bit. It's just some more information that sprout growers are going to need to maintain about where seeds are grown, where they're processed, where they're conditioned, things like that. So the other one after the initial growing are records for receivers. I'm not going to really just necessarily read through all this, but well, I guess I kind of will. But these are the records that a receiver is going to, so anyone that receives a product that is on the food traceability is going to need to keep the location identifier of their previous source. If you're importing it, the import number, specific quantities and units of measures of food. So whether it's a case or a pallet or 20 pallets, you're going to have records of exactly the quantity you're receiving, as well as tying it back to the kind of location description of where it was grown or harvested or packed. This will just be that essential record, the key data elements for receivers that they will need to maintain. First receivers is a little bit of a unique category that was created for this rule, and largely to deal with the complexity of operations at the farm level. So a farm level may have one person grow the product, one company harvest the product, one company cool the product, and one company even do the initial packing of the product, and then ship it out to the real first receiver. In these situations, there may be an opportunity that the grower or harvester or anyone hasn't actually created a traceability lot code, so the first receiver would have to do that, after which the first receiver would just need the typical records of any receiver that were mentioned before this. There are some special different requirements for seafood, just since the process is so different, but the real thing is the fishing vessel would assign a traceability lot code and have a harvest date range and location, which is either a GPS coordinate or kind of the National Marine Fisheries Service kind of ocean coordinate location for where the harvest actually occurred. Transformers is the category core people that are bringing in an ingredient that is on the food traceability list and transforming it into something else. So this is going to apply, and the difference between foods used in transformation and foods produced through transformation for slightly different rules. But the overall idea is if you're bringing in food on the food traceability list and changing it, then you're going to have that sort of record lined up. So this applies to packing houses or distribution centers that may even just relabel or put things, large containers into smaller containers for retail purchase. That is considered processing and would be considered a transformation of the food on the traceability list. And after that, I mean, it's a lot of the same requirements that are required within the other rules with quantity of the products, the lots of the products, and the lots of the kind of produced products as well. The key here being you're bringing in a food traceability list ingredient and transforming it into another food ingredient. Creators is a little bit different. So this is where you're actually bringing in ingredients that are not on the food traceability list, but creating a product that is on the food traceability. The prime example is going to be for, the example I'm going to use is peanut butter. So peanuts are not on the food traceability list. So you're essentially bringing in an ingredient that doesn't have the food traceability list requirements up to that point, but you're creating a nut butter, which is on the list. So in those instances, you're going to create your traceability product identifier, lot code, description, and document the amount you're creating, the unit measure, how it's packaged, and how you're maintaining all those records. The one note that I threw in here, although retail establishments are largely covered by the rule, except for some proposed kind of partial exemptions for, or potentially full exemptions for small retail establishments, this area doesn't apply to retail food establishments that are selling food directly to consumers. But they still would have to have those receiving records that I've already kind of discussed.
Yeah, so any of these subcategories, like a transformer or a creator, right, Eric? If you're a first receiver, all of the things from first receivers will still apply, correct?
Yes, exactly. So you're kind of covered by the rule and it goes forward, but and you can add and fit into multiple categories. So Records for shippers. Anytime a product on the food traceability is shipped, you're falling under the rule too. So you have to keep records really similar to all the ones, the location description, traceability lot code, product description, all these other things that I've kind of already talked about, so I'm not going to focus on here. The part that I wanted to focus on and why we've highlighted it in yellow is these records that are highlighted in yellow. Anytime that you ship a product that's on the food traceability list, you must include these highlighted records with the shipment. So that is the information that is going to follow through every single step of the supply chain, so everyone has it, so it can be traced back really quickly. Make sure that, just a consistent transfer of that information from one step to the next as it goes down the supply chain. One thing that to throw in there, kill steps. Lots of these products can be subject to a kill step. Some of them aren't, which could affect kind of what records you're keeping. The real takeaway here is that a kill step reduces the risk of any sort of microbial contamination. And so the real need for the extensive records required under the food traceability rule are not going to be as helpful because the microbial hazard would have already been taken care of. So in a sense, like you said, if you're receiving a food traceability list ingredient at your facility, you still have all those receiving records, but then you apply your kill step and document that kill step, whether it's kind of a low acid canned food process or whether it's just a preventive controls under the FSMA rules. You have a documented kill step that significantly reduces the microbial load and reduces the food safety risk. After you apply that kill step, any subsequent shipping, you would not have to keep the same food traceability records. You'd be more back into that one up, one down category after you've applied a kill step. And if you have documentation that you're receiving a food that's already received a kill step, your records are basically stopped there as well. You have records of the kill step, so you're not going to need to keep these same food traceability rule records for receipt, any subsequent transformation, or even when you ship the food out. So it's just an area where FDA has identified as if a kill step is actually applied, the risk we're trying to address is largely addressed. And so the records requirements are more typical of what you would expect in industry. The record maintenance and availability is this area where, just like all the other FDA records, within 24 hours after request is when you're going to need to supply your records and information that you're maintaining on the rule. The interesting part about this, largely because the rule is designed to really help efficient trace back or trace forward in the event of a public health issue or a recall event. So Sakota hazard, the serious adverse health consequences or death to humans or animals, is a standard that's used in the rule. If FDA ever suspects anything like that, they can come to you and request information in which they'll provide kind of the date range of that they're interested in, as well as the specific food product. But within 24 hours, you need to provide a electronic sortable spreadsheet with all of the food traceability rule information within that sort of spreadsheet to FDA. So that's really where, if you have to take time to get paper records and convert them into an electronic sortable spreadsheet, it's going to be real burdensome. So this is one area where I see the FDA really pushing, saying you need to have electronic records so we can access them really quickly. But that's just something to think about when you're thinking about developing your programs around this.
Well, and this is exactly right, Eric. I mean, this is where you have to think forward, right? The need and the requirements for electronic information is not going to lessen in any way, shape, or form over the next few years, whether this is FSMA or anything else. So it's really a matter of, if you have paper-based programs right now, let's take a look at that, right? This is something that can be a lot easier with technology. Obviously, I'm biased, but the basic facts are there. You can make a lot of mess taking care of all this in paper, or you can make it a lot less burdensome for your operators, for your packers, everybody coming in, the shipments coming in, when you do apply technology the right way.
That's so true. So very true. Okay. And just as the last slide to touch on this, so the proposed rule is out there now. Obviously, you're looking into getting familiar with it. If you have any questions or really want to get your input to the FDA to have them consider it, the comment period is open until January 21 of next year. So you've got a little time to get your comments. And then obviously FDA will take all those comments and consider them. And then we'll really see the final rule that's going to come into play. So this food traceability list as proposed now may change a little bit. Some of the requirements may change a little bit. So it's good to be aware of it, but also be aware that it's not necessarily set in stone. And if you or your industry or your company sees any issues with the rule, now's the time to voice your concern to FDA so they consider it before finalizing anything that would be overly detrimental to your business or just too difficult to comply with. Later on, there will be opportunities for waivers and things, but once FDA gets an opportunity to kind of review all these comments and really think about what they're going to be requiring, the final rule will be proposed and or put out in the Federal Register, just like this rule proposal, and then will be technically in effect 60 days after publication. But right now, FDA is looking to allow everyone basically 2 years for compliance. It's going to be different than the other FSMA rules because the other FSMA rules had staggered tiered compliance dates based on the size of your business and things like that. But for traceability to work, you need to have everyone on board. So that's why it's kind of across the board. Everyone has the exact same compliance date. Makes it simpler and definitely makes the rule effective so it can meet its intended purpose. As I said, we've included some of the exemptions and modified requirements, the link there from the FDA. If you want to look at those or if you have any questions, we can try to get to those. But yeah, so in general, it's really something to be aware of. FDA is moving as quickly as they can on this. Obviously, that does take a little bit of time to consider all the comments, and we expect them to receive quite a few, but this is definitely coming down the pipeline as it was mandated by Congress, and we're looking forward to kind of the effect and efficiency that it'll help with traceability exercises.
Yeah. It does seem, though, Eric, to the casual observer that this is a little bit faster paced than what we've normally come to. I mean, 60 days is going to be here in no time, right? After that public comment period. So it's really not a matter of, okay, we've got more time to wait. We're actively talking to our customers, SafetyChain, saying, no, let's really get this ironed out now, right? This isn't something that you should be putting off because the pace does seem a little peppy, a little bit faster.
Yeah, and I think the FDA would push this through with a final rule today if they could, type of thing. So they're not showing any hesitation, and yeah, like you said, you don't want to be working down to the wire on actually getting a program developed that'll work for you and meet all the requirements. It's something to really start looking into now, especially if you're transitioning from paper records, which I do highly recommend.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. So, well, Eric, this has been fantastic. You covered a ton of ground in about a half hour, but we have got a load of questions. So I'm going to just start popping off a few. We understand everyone's time is super valuable, but we want to get to a few of these. One, and we see this time and time again, Eric, is Natasha is asking about the pet treats. So, what's covered? Are pet treats? Talk about the non-food requirements. Any implication there?
That is actually a very good question. And I meant to touch on that when I was talking about the food traceability list. So looking at the food traceability list, you'll notice there aren't any animal foods on the list. But going back to kind of how FDA created that list, when we talked about being the usual suspects, it's because they've been associated with illness outbreaks and recalls in the past. But FDA in their assessment used CDC data for tracking human illness, for really evaluating that. nobody's really done that at this point in any extensive way anyway for illnesses associated directly with pet food. There's just not a great database. So animal food, pet food is not exempt from this rule. It just happens to be the FDA doesn't have really the data to associate with historical illness as much as they do with your typical human food. But at any point, the FDA could adjust this list, or you may even see in the final rule they add some pet food or animal feed to the list as well. But right now, there's really just not a CDC for animal illness right now. Although states and different organizations are starting to do it, the data just isn't quite there to justify placement on the food traceability list yet.
Okay, that's a big relief for, I think. So thanks for that. All right, so Laura asks, not all products have batch and lot code associated. So are PO numbers or other processes acceptable?
You know, it's really going to depend on exactly what is in there. So the purchase order could have information in there, but if your purchase order doesn't have some sort of lot code, you're going to have to somehow identify and assign a lot code or a traceability lot code to that product. So like with a lot of rules FDA is doing, they're not saying this is one by one how you have to do it. They just say you need to have records that have this information. So purchase orders may have that information, and that may end up being one of those reference records that you rely on, that you reference in your program. But you just need to make sure that you actually have those kind of the unit measurement and kind of the product descriptions included within that purchase order or on another document that has the necessary information.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. And some of this is, Eric, we'll get some questions where it's very hairy. There's not a lot we can offer except some opinions, and some of these are going to be opinion based. So, but your thoughts are still very valid. So appreciate that. So here's an interesting one, and it's talking about FSVP. So as an importer, do I need to get compliance with this rule to check with vendor on specific ingredients for multi-ingredient products? So this one's a tough one to unpack, or just rely on lot code for the finished product.
So, yeah, and I'm not going to be able to answer this one with great precision, but I would be happy to connect with you offline with this question.
Okay.
So when you're taking importing a single ingredient, it's pretty straightforward. But if the list also covers anything that has a multi-ingredient product that has these as a single ingredient. So you are definitely going to need to talk to the importer and somehow, or the importer is going to have to talk to the foreign supplier and get some sort of information. In a lot of these situations, if they're using different ingredients as a single ingredient, there may be a kind of transformation period where the transformer has created a new traceability lot code that applies to that finished product. But if that's not necessarily the case, you would have to kind of track back to get more information.
And this is a perfect case, Eric, where it's like, boy, it's so dependent on the specifics of those ingredients at this point. This is where consulting really comes in, and this is why TAG exists, really. So
I'm just thinking about you go ahead.
No, I was just going to move on. I think that's a great question. We'll have that available for you to maybe follow up with after as well. But we did get a couple of questions about nut butter. So one person asked, will nut butter items also include peanut butter filled pretzels or crackers, things that contain peanut butter as an ingredient?
Yes.
Okay. And
the way to look at this, so any product that contains any of the foods listed on the list as an ingredient, even if it's not in the name necessarily, are going to be subject to these records. And I'll use an example, peanuts not covered, transform it or create peanut butter, which is going to create the initial point at which food traceability rule applies. But then that peanut butter could go into, let's say, a peanut butter cracker or peanut butter cracker sandwich or peanut butter sandwich. That's going to be a transformation that does not have a kill step in most situations. So there's going to be some records. But if you take that peanut butter and put it into a peanut butter cookie that's baked with a validated kill step, you're not going to have the same records. So it really depends on your overall process and the kill steps. But yeah, any ingredient is going to be found kind of under this rule.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's another example. Again, we've got a lot of peanut butter questions here. So if we make peanut butter soft serve yogurt, then there is a kill step with the pasteurization of the product identifier. They don't need to go with the BOL. Is that right?
So depends on who's applying the pasteurization. So I'm imagining the yogurt manufacturers bringing in the peanut butter that's not pasteurized. So they're going to have the receiving record, but then they apply the pasteurization kill step. So for their subsequent shipping records, they're not going to have the same requirements. But if they ship out the finished yogurt, it's going to kind of change in that sense, depending on where the kill step is applied.
Yep, got it. Okay, that's good to know. It really does matter where and who is applying that pasteurization. So, okay, so are distributors required to have evidence of kill steps?
Yes. I'm just going to put that. This is going to be a difficult one to answer as well. So I'm the distributor is going to be the one that's basically receiving a product. If they don't have the information about the kill step, they're going to have no knowledge to say, I don't need to keep these other food traceability records. So without knowledge and of the appropriate kill step, they're going to need to keep these. To kind of say, we're covered under the kill step kind of record exclusion area, they're going to have to show information that the food has actually been subjected to a kill step. Yeah, otherwise, the kind of the go-to would be, yes, you need the record.
Okay. Very good. So there are so many questions. I'm telling you, Eric, this is a really good. This is a really, really good topic. So another question, it's kind of about the dairy side of this. Just a general question, understanding why dairy products aren't on the list. Can you speak to that just at a high level, why that wasn't appearing?
Well, soft cheeses are on the list, so dairy is not completely excluded. And it's just, if you want to go into the specifics about kind of the FDA hazard analysis and assessing historical risk and everything, there is a way to do that. Just they've released that information. But generally, because I imagine, so raw milk would be something that could have been added to the list due to historical issues and things like that. But since the FDA doesn't really allow raw milk to be shipped in interstate commerce regardless, it's more of a state issue, so it could have been left off the list. And then some of the kind of listeria issues with ice cream in recent history may not have they may have ended up just not having the severity of the illness or kind of frequency of occurrence that FDA needed to add it to the list. Okay.
Well, good. I'm gonna get one more question here, and we're gonna wrap this up. We had a few different. I'm gonna combine a few as best as I can, Eric. So apologies for the few people that separately asked this, but I'm gonna ask it in more a general fashion. We've seen a big difference in the way people are consuming foods. Point of purchase often happens at your doorstep now through, so we're talking the DoorDashes and the Grubhubs of the world. So considering that as being a shipping method and or do these requirements apply to restaurants or other food service settings who are receiving those FTL foods? So two facets: restaurants and food service settings receiving those FTLs, or delivery. Now, generally the delivery, those are fine because that's all cooked. That's past the point of everything, I think. But again, I'm in marketing. I'm not in your land. So what are your overall guidance on that, Eric?
Yeah, so there is a exemption for that limited last mile delivery, basically. So the restaurant would be covered under the receiving rules to actually have that information that was sent from their shipper about kind of the traceability lot code and everything. But if then the restaurant or retail establishment creates or transforms one of these foods, they are not required to the same kind of creation records that a manufacturing facility would be that doesn't sell directly to consumers. So there is kind of this final mile record exclusion for creators of foods on the food traceability list, that they would not need to keep the same records if they're selling or sending the food directly to the consumer. So that would include the mail orders and things as well.
Yeah. Okay. Good. There is some of that exclusion. So there's a lot more questions, Eric. We could honestly, with the amount of questions, and these are all great questions, some about electronic records, still complying with FDA record keeping requirements, that still exists. Yes, we don't want to get away from that. But ultimately, we do have to wrap this up. So lots more information available, right? So you can go to SafetyChain and get past recordings for FSMA Friday, the Atchison Group. Make sure you got their newsletter coming inbound. I think it's a weekly newsletter. It's packed with really great stuff. I review it every week. And just, hey, everybody has very specific individual requirements and needs and thoughts, because we're all putting different ingredients into our foods and putting them out in the marketplace. We're all getting different ingredients coming in those warehouse, the manufacturing facilities. So we need custom guidance. We need specific guidance, and the Atchison Group is definitely the folks to get that. So go join FSMA Friday on LinkedIn if you haven't already. There's a good community growing there. I think it's over 6,000 experts. And I say it's the people you want to know very closely when you have questions like we're seeing today. And then I think we're on next again with the labeling changes, Eric, in November. So we'll be back on the line in less than a month. And with that, I'll wrap it up. I appreciate your time, Eric. This is a super, super hot topic. So I'm very happy that we've got close partnership with the Atchison Group and yourself. So with that, we'll end today's presentation. Again, thank you, Eric, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.
Of course. And we'll do this again real soon. That'll wrap it up, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Happy Halloween, and we'll see you in about a month. Cheers.
Thank you.